It may seem a little insensitive to speak about gratitude in today's political climate. When the worship team planned this service, we had little way of knowing how the election would go. I don't think it even crossed our minds to consider it. We just thought it would be a fitting theme for this Sunday before Thanksgiving. But maybe, just maybe, this really is the right time to contemplate gratitude. Let's consider George Bailey. You know, the guy from It's a Wonderful Life. If anyone here is not intimately familiar with that classic Christmas movie, let me sum up. So George Bailey had a really bad day. His bumbling uncle misplaces a large deposit for his building and loan company. George proceeds to yell at his wife and kids, then begs old mean Mr. Potter for money, who laughingly tells him that he's worth more dead than alive. Next, he gets punched in the face, crashes his car into a tree, stumbles through the snow in town, and ends up at a bridge. He appears to be contemplating jumping. At this point, George is helped by an angel. The angel shows him what would have happened if he hadn't been born. That awful world reduces George to tears and makes him want to live again. He returns home to find it full of townspeople emptying their savings into an increasingly large pile. His wonderful wife had spread the news that George needed help, and they rushed over to raise the lost funds. This is a heartwarming scene where the takeaway is that no man is a failure if he has friends. George looks overcome with gratitude at the end. But I want to back up a little bit. Everyone pooling their money to help is lovely, but it's not something we can really count on in life. Perhaps the odd GoFundMe campaigns can raise money, but most of the time there's no knight on a white horse to save the day. And the part about the angel coming, I'm about 97% sure is not going to happen. So where does that leave us? On the bridge with no way to fix a bad situation. This is where life leaves us sometimes. Solutions to our problems seem hopelessly evasive. How can we access gratitude in those dark times? What about the mundane times? Surely it can't only be possible once everything gets fixed for us. If that were the case, many of us would never be able to access the undeniable benefits of gratitude. So maybe we can't just wait for miracles to happen. Maybe it takes a little extra work on our part. Let's take a little look into the career of Mary Michalek. I'm not going to go into many details, but I got my Vermont teaching license in June of 2008. I had a couple of long-term sub-jobs and secured a teaching job the following year. Budget cuts eliminated that job, and for years I took temporary positions or ones that I was overqualified for. Last I counted, I'd interviewed over 50 times. I won't bore you with all the ways I tried to stand out from the competition, but just know that I did try. To paraphrase The Princess Bride, I was getting used to disappointment. My rock bottom was in the summer of 2020, which was already a pretty low time for everyone. The school librarian I had just completed an internship with was retiring, and I interviewed for her position. After 2 interviews that went extremely well, the superintendent called me to tell me that the hiring committee decided to go with an internal candidate over me given the current situation, COVID. Now, this person was a TA at the district who was still completing a school library certification, while I was in fact certified. They hired someone they knew who was unqualified over me. To say I was disappointed would be a vast understatement. I could not stop crying. I tried to for Wally's sake, but I was completely devastated. I had thought the job was mine and had already started planning how to implement COVID guidelines to an elementary library. At that point, I had felt the defeat of rejection many times. Maybe it should get easier, but at that moment, I could not find the silver lining. And yet, time moved on. I finally have my ideal job in my local high school library. My current position is a much better fit than the one that ruined my week in 2020. So what? Wait, and things might get better? Well, they did in this case. But going back to 2020, what helped me get up the next day? What could have helped George Bailey see through his cloud of despair to help himself? Maybe it's just as simple as counting blessings. Take a moment to breathe and think about the things that are, rather than the things that aren't. I thought about the parts of my life that were going well. Maybe my career wasn't where I wanted it to be, but I had a wonderful family. I was married to someone I loved and had a pretty fantastic kid. My church community was amazing. We owned a home in a location we wanted to live in for the rest of our lives. Looking at these things helped me get up and keep going. It made it possible for me to work through despair to get to the other side. And the plus of going through the struggle is that my gratitude now is deeper than what it would have been had I landed here right away. When I am tempted to be overwhelmed by frustration from the day-to-day challenges of working in a public school, I remind myself of that low point. I take a deep breath and think about how wonderful it is that I can walk to work. I'm in the same district as my child who can come to my library after school. I think of my students who are funny and insightful, and most of the time want to do the right things. So maybe we can all access gratitude, but some hardship makes it easier to find.
Morning. I wanted to take this topic of gratitude and look at it from the point of view of how we're all connected in very ordinary ways. Gratitude is our recognition of our connection to all things. It is not a static state of mind, it is a practice. The practice of gratitude is an ongoing process of growth. When my granddaughter was in first grade, her teacher assigned each student to come to class each day, prepared to share with the class what they were grateful for that day. As my granddaughter excitedly told me about this assignment, I thought to myself, what a great way to teach young children the practice of gratitude. The practice of gratitude is essential to us if we are to understand the underlying web of existence that we all depend on. We need each other. There is no such thing as a self-made person. One of our culture's largest, and I would submit, harmful myths is the myth of being a self-made success story. Even as I think about it, while writing this sermonette, that thought conjures up visions of my Hollywood-induced understanding of the American cowboy and the American West. The self-made man of the Old West, out there on the lone prairie, noble steed, a blanket rolled up on the saddle in his trusty six-shooter, eating his grub, drinking his coffee, all alone beside his campfire, his guitar, and singing to the cattle. Even as a young child, I wondered, where was all of this cooking paraphernalia and the guitar during the daytime? Did he make his own saddle, his clothes, his hat, boots, his trusty six-shooter? Doubtful. During the 2012 presidential campaign, then President Barack Obama, in one of his campaign speeches where he was addressing the captains of commerce and industry, said, "You didn't build that. Somebody helped to create this unbelievable American system that you are allowed you to thrive in." Needless to say, the captains of industry did not receive that message well. After all, the captains of the economy pride themselves on being self-made men and women whose hard work allowed them to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, right? By the way, that expression originated in the 19th century and was originally used to describe the absurdity of undertaking impossible tasks. We can feel gratitude in very ordinary and unexpected places. Example, there was a short essay that some of you are probably familiar with. It was published in 1964 by an economist named Leonard Read. The essay was written for economists, but it ended up finding a much broader audience. It was entitled, "I Pencil." It tells the story of all the raw materials and people and processes that are involved in the creation of this thing that we have been using all our lives, cutting-edge technology in about 1835, and had a long history in Europe too. It tells the story of the literally thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people and businesses involved in the manufacture of a pencil. Cedar logs harvested from the Northwest by lumber companies and loaded and shipped onto trucks and cars to be taken to trucks and train cars, factory in California. All those vehicles built by hundreds and hundreds of people, processed at a factory in California and loaded onto rail cars and trucks and shipped across the nation to another factory. At that factory, wood is fashioned into pencil blanks. Pencil lead, which is not real lead, is a complex mixture of many materials. Graphite, mined in Ceylon, put in sacks, shipped across the ocean to be mixed with clay and formed into pencil leads in large kilns. Graphite lids are installed into the pencil blanks and it's laminated together. 6 coats of lacquer. Who made the lacquer? Labels printed on the pencil. This one I particularly liked. I got a whole box of these when I was a teacher, and it says, "Please return to Mr. Danis." A brass ferrule, this little metal thing up here that's made of 2 or 3 different materials that are mined in different places. And finally, an eraser, which turns out not to be rubber, made of another composite material. There would be no pencils without this very complicated and expensive network of many people and industries. The term empathy is used to describe a wide range of experiences. Emotion researchers define empathy as the ability to sense other people's emotions, coupled with the ability to understand what someone else might be thinking or feeling as if we were thinking and feeling it too. Fred Rogers, as in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, carried a note in his pocket given to him by a social worker, and the note said, "Frankly, there isn't anyone you couldn't learn to love once you've heard their story." The term empathy is directly involved in gratitude, of being gratitude, being grateful. I remember my daughter at about age 1 grimacing anytime she heard a baby crying nearby. Is empathy inborn? Gratitude on the deepest level is a reflection and an acknowledgement and acceptance of our own worth to God, nature, the world around us, and to other people. When we choose gratitude, we accept ourselves as worthy, and we give ourselves permission to be loved. One thing that I just thought about was, is this just for humans? Or are there other species, particularly socialized species? And I came upon the example, I thought was pretty impressive, of modern canids, or dogs, evolved from wolves. Wolf packs are highly socialized, and a lone wolf does not do well. They often don't survive very long without the pack. Another thing about wolves, they don't have eyebrows. Dogs have eyebrows. So how did this happen? Well, it turns out that over eons, dogs have developed 2 small muscles in their bra, adjacent to their eyes, that enable them to express and respond to emotional context in their interactions with humans. I wonder if they feel gratitude.
Good morning. How's everyone doing today? Yeah, really? Because if you're anything like me, maybe you've been feeling pretty anxious or down in the last few weeks. It's hard to feel joy, love, optimism, peace, and hope when you're existentially worried about the state of the nation and the world. But you know what? I don't think we should be surprised when we encounter hard times. Difficult times have been a constant throughout history, and virtually everyone will see them at some point in their lives. In my 68 years on this earth, I have experienced national crises and strife. The Kennedy assassination, the Vietnam War, race riots, 9/11, the COVID pandemic, and last month's election. But think of all the things our forebears endured that were just as bad, if not worse. 2 world wars, the Great Depression, a civil war, a revolutionary war, flu, smallpox, and polio epidemics, the San Francisco earthquake. And that's just in the US. The rest of the world has experienced all of these kinds of events, but also genocides, famines, and droughts that created unimaginable misery. We can add to these global events that we must face the personal tragedies that people have to live through. Severe health challenges, financial insecurity, job loss, domestic and sexual abuse, divorce, the death of a loved one. So was the Buddha right when he famously said that all life is suffering? This was such an important concept for him that it is the first of his 4 noble truths. Or actually, maybe not. The word suffering turns out to be a problematic translation. But for the purposes of this sermon, suffering will do. In a nutshell, Buddha's message was that when we cling to the way we want our lives and the world to be, refusing to accept them the way they actually are, we create our own suffering. Yeah, I admit I'm having a hard time accepting the political situation in the US, the bombing of innocent Palestinians in Gaza, and the war in Ukraine. And that is what is causing much of my suffering, stress, and dissatisfaction right now. So how would the Buddha advise us to deal with global and personal hardship? He would tell us to embrace and be grateful for our life, every part of it, hardships and all. He would tell us that there is beauty and wonder enough in the world to fill our hearts with joy, even while we acknowledge suffering and work to alleviate it. As the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh puts it in his book, Being Peace, life is filled with suffering, but is also filled with many wonders, like the blue sky, the sunshine, the eyes of a baby. To suffer is not enough. We must also be in touch with the wonders of life. They are within us and all around us, everywhere, anytime. Indeed. This perspective is not so different from verse 113 of the Gnostic Gospel according to St. Thomas. His disciples said to him, "When will the kingdom come, Lord?" Jesus said, "It will not come by waiting for it. It will not be a matter of saying, 'Here it is,' or 'There it is.' Rather, the kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and men do not see it." So the $64,000 question is, how do we see this heavenly kingdom here on earth right now in the midst of suffering? As Thich Nhat Hanh suggests, we start by being more mindful of the remarkable things and people all around us, and to make small offerings of gratitude for them, as we did in our morning meditation. We need to turn gratitude from a noun into a verb and to practice it regularly. And once you start exercising this gratitude muscle, you become more aware of the endless array of things in your life to be grateful for. But in the busyness of our lives, it can be difficult to remember to do this. We can proactively create rituals for experiencing and expressing gratitude. One such ritual that many families follow is to hold hands around the Thanksgiving dinner table and have each person tell what they're grateful for. And that's wonderful, but it's only once a year. Maintaining an attitude of gratitude needs much more exercise of our gratitude muscle than that. Thich Nhat Hanh suggests taking mundane events throughout our day and using them as triggers to contemplate gratitude. For example, you could take 1 minute in the morning and evening right before you brush your teeth to do a shortened version of our meditation from earlier in the service. Or my personal trigger is to do this meditation every time I come to a traffic light. That might work in Potsdam, but it may not work in Manhattan, because you're stopping every few seconds, it seems. And I also suggest that you don't close your eyes in the car while you're doing this meditation. Another trigger that I really like is the Jewish tradition of giving a prayer of gratitude for being alive every morning as you open your eyes in bed. Dr. Laurie Santos, host of the podcast The Happiness Lab, explains that it also helps to keep a gratitude journal. Every night before bed, you write down several things that you're grateful for from that day. And this has scientific proof. Studies have shown that this practice produces significant, measurable improvements in one's happiness. These short experiments of gratitude, a minute here, a minute there, have made a cumulatively transformative difference in how I experience and interact with the world. They help me not only to accept, but to embrace and be grateful for the wonder of my life and the world, exactly as they are, suffering and all. And in turn, that gratitude nourishes the hope, compassion, and clarity that I need to continue the hard work of making the world a better place for all. May it be so.